It seems that sometimes animals feel and see much more than people. This unusual wolf refused to leave the dead girl. Doctors had to intervene in the case and soon discovered the shocking and terrible truth. When looking at the beautiful Julia in a wedding dress, lying in a coffin, everyone present began to cry. The people around were supposed to watch the girl walk down the aisle, beaming and happy on her wedding day. But instead, they found themselves at her funeral. Suddenly, a wolf ran into the room, jumped straight into the coffin, and refused to budge. A terribly upset John asked the wolf to leave, but it did not react in any way to his words. John suddenly remembered the moment when he first met Julia. Julia adored the forest and often went hiking. In the fresh air, she could breathe much easier compared to the stuffy city, which always aggravated her painful epilepsy. One day, while resting in a tent after a long hike, she heard a plaintive squeak outside. She peeked outside and noticed a small puppy nearby, looking weak and helpless. Kind-hearted Julia immediately rushed to the baby, but as soon as she took it in her arms, she realized that it was not a dog, but a wolf cub. Julia tensed, knowing that the cub's mother could be nearby. Her presence would make the situation unpredictable and extremely dangerous. However, several minutes passed and no she-wolf appeared. The little cub continued to gaze at Julia with hungry, pitiful eyes, squeaking softly. Julia quickly realized that something had happened to its mother and that the lost cub would not survive in the wild without help. She took the wolf cub home, feeding it warm, nutritious milk. The baby soon fell asleep, curled up on a soft blanket. Julia understood that she could not raise a wolf cub on her own, as it would one day become a large, wild predator. So, she brought the cub, whom she named Charlie, to a nearby wildlife nursery. A kind employee named John promised that they would take good care of Charlie and allowed Julia to visit him several times a week. Julia happily agreed, and whenever she had free time, she would visit the nursery to see the growing Charlie. Over time, Julia became close not only to the wolf cub, but also to John. They shared many common interests, especially their love for nature and animals. John and Julia took care of Charlie together, treating him like a big dog. The wolf reciprocated their love, grateful for his rescue. When John unexpectedly proposed to Julia, she happily accepted, and they set a wedding date for the near future. Julia adored her wedding dress, in which she looked incredibly beautiful and sweet. But Julia's illness shattered their dreams. One day when John arrived at her home, he was horrified to find her lifeless body on the bed. A familiar doctor soon arrived and confirmed that Julia had passed away due to her epilepsy. John could not hold back his tears. Instead of the long-awaited wedding, he had to bury his beloved bride. Overwhelmed with grief, he decided to dress Julia in her wedding gown, the one she had cherished so much. On the day of the funeral, John, like many of those present, was devastated. Seeing his beautiful bride lying in a coffin in her wedding dress was unbearable, and tears welled up in his eyes. He knew that Charlie had also loved Julia deeply, so he decided to let the wolf say his final goodbye. However, when the wolf entered the hall and saw Julia's lifeless body, he behaved extremely unexpectedly. The predator ran up to the open coffin, jumped straight inside, and flatly refused to come back out. Neither John nor the rest of those present could persuade Charlie to move away from the girl's body. John realized that something was wrong and immediately called 911. The doctors who arrived at the scene were initially very surprised. However, after numerous requests from John, they agreed to re-examine the deceased girl. Suddenly, one of the doctors screamed and began whispering something to his colleagues. The doctors quickly placed Julia's body on a stretcher, carried her to the ambulance, and rushed to the hospital. John, shocked by what was happening, followed closely behind. A few minutes later, they arrived at the intensive care unit, where Julia was immediately admitted. One of the doctors, in a trembling voice, explained to John that his fiancée had been mistakenly declared dead. It turned out that Julia had catalepsy, an extremely rare condition in which a person exhibits almost no signs of vital activity. This is one of the rarest symptoms of epilepsy. In such cases, the affected person appears lifeless. Their breathing becomes so shallow that it seems non-existent. Their heartbeat is nearly undetectable, and their limbs stiffen as if the body is in rigor mortis. Fortunately, Charlie realized that his owner was still alive and prevented her from being buried alive. At the hospital, after a few hours of intensive care, doctors managed to resuscitate Julia. They were relieved to inform John that her brain had miraculously not suffered any damage from oxygen deprivation. Soon Julia regained consciousness. When John recounted what had happened, she burst into tears, struggling to believe the reality of her situation. She could only think of how she had survived thanks to the wolf, who had seemingly expressed gratitude for her kindness in such a miraculous way. Not long after, John and Julia got married. Of course, the most honored guest at their wedding was none other than Charlie, their faithful wolf. Dear viewers, what do you think about this incredible story? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Goodbye.